All right.
Okay, go ahead.
Hey everyone, I'm Sam. I'm a neurobiology and physiology major here, graduating senior. I graduate in like 20 days or something, less. It's kind of scary. I applied MD PhD last year. I did interviews at around 8 schools, and I'm now chosen going to University of Michigan's MD PhD. My interest in neurodegeneration, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Lou Gehrig's disease.
I'm Janina. I'm a bioengineering major, Spanish minor, also graduating in weeks. I applied to a lot of schools, and if you really want to know, I can tell you how many later. Got a good number of interviews. 4 acceptances. I applied all MD PhD, and ended up choosing Virginia Commonwealth in Richmond. My interest is in neuro and cancer, so I'm going to be doing lab rotations in both starting this summer to kind of get a feel for everything.
So I'm Ori, I'm a senior, also graduating. I'm a biochem major, and I'm going to Columbia next year to their MD PhD program. And as my numbers were kind of similar, I'm sure we'll talk about that more.
Yeah.
I'm David Tovar. I graduated 2 years ago, actually, so I've been out working at the FDA and over in a lab here in College Park. My major was neurobiology as well. I applied to 14 places, got interviews at 5, accepted at 4. And my interest is top-down modulation of sensory systems.
So I'm Adam, and I graduated in 2008, and I interviewed at like 15 or 14, got 7 interviews, and live in Maryland. I'm currently studying pharmacogenomics and antiplatelets. So it's basically genetic factors that drive humans' ability to respond to antiplatelet drugs like Plavix or aspirin. But my general interest are genetics and genomics.
So I'm Joshua, and actually, Ori, is your last name Lieberman?
Yeah.
So we're the Liebermans.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as far as we know.
Right. Yeah. And we're interested in infectious disease.
Right.
Also,
And we couldn't recruit you, though. So, let's see. I finished my PhD in 2011 in December. Went back a little bit off cycle, so I am graduating in December of this year. This year's 2013. I finished all the requirements. I have more or less. I have a 4-week elective in July, and then a 4-week rural medicine rotation, which is one of the requirements in Maryland, in August. And sort of now I'm just playing around in the lab, going on to a couple of sort of exciting biochemistry projects that I never really quite got to during my PhD. My PhD was in how bacterium enteropathogenic E. coli builds a pilus, an attachment mechanism or attachment sort of surface appendage, and I focused on the outer membrane protein in that system. It's very funny when people ask you, what would you do for undergraduate, as you have, that's what 8 years out for me. But it's nice to be back in grade levels. It's pretty good. You guys know smarter.
We just finished like applications, interviews, like revisits, everything, staying with people during interviews, seeing schools, like any of those things, and they're actually in the program. And
I was going to say maybe you could like subspecialize, like anything that's involving like strategizing applications and interview strategies as well. Basically everything that's pre-med school, and then the expectations of the actual programs. Maybe Josh can handle.
That sounds like a good idea. So maybe you all could talk about maybe how you even decided on MD PhD. Did you apply to all combined programs? Did you sort through those questions? And what the application cycle was like? Maybe a tip you learned along the way.
Sure. I did apply all MD PhD, and I guess I got interested in it a long time ago. My dad is an MD who does research, and so I kind of had a family history in it, and have been doing research for a long time. As far as I don't know, what were the other things you listed? As you go through the process, why did you choose your school? Or
yeah.
So I ended up coming down to 3 schools, or I guess 4, but Yale, University of Pittsburgh, Michigan, and Emory. And when you're deciding between the final schools, it's pretty tough. And I would say, really, it ends up. I asked a lot of students, and they said it's a gut feeling. Where do you feel like you had the best relations with the people you talked to about potentially doing rotations with? Where did you feel like your classmates were really your type? You could see yourself spending the entire 8 years with them. all of those factors. And it's really hard to think about the idea that you're going to be spending 8 years in one place, you know, and you need to like that place not only now as your leaving college self, but as your almost 30-year-old or more self later, you know. And so it was definitely a hard decision to make. And everyone I talked to said they really made it based on their gut instinct of this is the place I feel comfortable, this is the place I feel like I should be.
Let me add one more question to this, which is, and maybe we want to tackle this one separately,
Sure.
but why do you think that you were a good MD PhD applicant? Like, what was going on with your application that made you think you were ready? Because you obviously were, you know, you got in. You know, well, don't you think you all want to know that? Or whether or not you might be ready for this or what you might still need to do?
Sure. I guess I'll just like start off, we'll go down the line.
Yeah.
Alright, so I guess personally, there's the very generic stuff like do your numbers meet certain cutoffs at a lot of different schools. I think like as far as hard cutoffs go, programs tend to stay away from them, but averages are somewhere between 3.6 and 4.0 for a GPA, I think. You know, somewhere around there. MCAT is pretty variable, but you can like contact schools about that too. And so that's like, I wouldn't say those ever make your application to an MD PhD program, right? They're more like, they can weed you out if they're too low. Other than that, I've been doing research for a long time. I started research technically, I guess like sophomore year of high school, but just during my summers, and so I did some summer projects then in neuroscience, and then I started doing work here on campus in this first semester of sophomore year, and I did a bunch of summer work and winter work over at Hopkins on ALS. From that work, I got a manuscript, a first author manuscript out of that to talk about. Other than that, good relationship with my mentor, good relationship with my teachers. Going to office hours is critical if you want a recommendation letter from teachers. I'd strongly recommend knowing them. Yes.
So, sorry, other than David and myself, who else took time off after undergrad?
We're going, three of us are going right in.
Yeah. Obviously, it worked for you guys. For me, I thought it was pretty important that I did a year of a post-bac at NIAID, which actually is hard for a number of reasons, but even having done a bunch of research up until that point, I was pretty scattered in some ways, and just getting used to the daily grind of being in the lab became really useful because that discipline served me pretty well. I got kind of lucky, kind of pushed out. There's a push to get back to med school relatively quickly, and so I did my PhD in about 3 years and I changed, which is sort of why I also have these lingering projects to go back to. And if after undergrad, particularly, probably like most of you guys, I was kind of burned out. So to just go to the lab, work, it was a job, right? But it was an interesting job. And to have that experience, I thought, you know, probably bolstered the application. But for me, it was really good training that I could then use when I was actually in grad school.
To add to that, like, it can be intimidating being in your seats and you hear, like, I've been doing research since I was in high school. I was a late starter. I actually, going into college, I was a business and psychology major. I got into neuroscience through a psychology class. After that, I switched into pre-med. It was 2 years where I had to cram everything in all in 2 years. Didn't really get a chance to do a lot of things in terms of extracurricular. Took the time off, joined 2 labs, one at the FDA, one here. Really got interested in the stuff that I was doing. And the lab that we have here in Maryland is just continuing to grow. Actually, Sarah back there is in our lab. So it's, even if you haven't known that this was your path the entire time, it's still possible.
I'll support that one. So I got interested, I came in here as an engineering major, and I didn't really know exactly where I wanted to take engineering, but I certainly didn't think it was going to be med school just because I didn't really have any exposure to it. And it was more sophomore year that I started seeing the medical side and the research side, and started kind of getting my feet wet in both. So it wasn't really until junior year that I had clinical experience and started research. I mean, when I was in your shoes, I was just finishing up my first year in the lab, and I mean, I'm sure like Wendy, I was concerned from the standpoint of my application because Sam's been doing research since sophomore year of high school. Like, how in the
Definitely
world
not
can I?
typical.
But
Yeah.
how in the world can I compete with that? And I guess that was where I saw my weak point was in my application. But what I can say to that is that in that year, I did a lot, and my passion really came through. I was a second author for a paper. I had some presentation experience, and I think it came down to interviews. I was able to show them that I developed that passion in a year. It takes some people longer. It took me a year. And I think that if you're able to get that through in your personal statements to get the interview, and then you can show that when you're actually there face to face with whoever's interviewing you, I think you're fine. Because I was more worried. I wasn't so much thinking about like how am I going to choose what school I'm going to get into. When I was in your shoe, I was like, how in the world am I going to get an interview? Just one. Like I just want one interview and then I'll take it from there. And I ended up having like 12 interview off. Like, show your passion. If you have the passion, no matter how long it takes, whether it's taking time off or going straight into it, if you can let that show, I think that's one of the most crucial aspects.
So I guess, so I'm going straight through, obviously, but if I could go back a year or two, I would totally take time off. And if for nothing else, like not take time off, but work in a lab and just like get to know myself and my research interests a little bit better. And so the reason that I am where I am now is because I kind of just was like on the path. And I knew this was what I wanted to do, and last year at this time I felt like I was ready to apply and I would get in. But meeting people on the interview trail, like realizing that what the positives of taking time off were, not really just as for them as people, not for their application, was also kind of made me regret a little bit. And there are some, actually most programs are pretty flexible about deferring after you've been accepted. But it turned out that like that's not what I did. But I would seriously think about going back again.
You know, I think particularly in med school, you know, in some ways when you're sort of, I won't say young and dumb, but when you're young and energetic, it's a little bit easier to get sort of maniacally obsessed in the lab. It's useful in grad school. Not necessarily in my homework, but it can help. In medical school, having a couple of extra years of life experience under your belt, whether it's the PhD or whether it's something else, I think makes for better positions. It's much easier to relate to your patients. It's much easier to get them to relate to you and to understand that trust and to just look at everyone that you meet from all different backgrounds with all sorts of health complaints, some of whom are incredibly sick and may have been for years. And to just be able to relate to them and have them be immediately comfortable with you. So you'll get that in your PhD. But if you want to bolster your experience or whatever, I think that's useful. And one other thing that came up was you don't need lots of research experience. You need at least one really focused research experience. Demonstrate that you're committed. And one thing I'd be curious to hear from the other panelists is what was your clinical experience like applying to med school? Because, I mean, I was a PhD candidate, or a PhD applicant, who also wanted to go to med school for reasons that are still a little bit beyond me.
So I don't remember if you remember this meeting with you, Wendy, but like a year ago I was like, I do not have enough clinical experience. And so I had shadowed, starting in high school, I had like 1 4-week period where I shadowed really intensely in high school. And then I went back to shadow him maybe once or twice a year. And then I had another experience where I shadowed him maybe like 5 Sundays all day. And I think that was on the low side in general, but it only came up in my interview in Maryland. And so everyone else just was like, what with multiple people actually. In my interview with every other interview was pretty much the same questions, and then at Maryland they asked me like clinical experience, like what did I do besides my research, like outside. So it's kind of weird, but so I think that you need to do it, and you need to be able to again have a focused experience, and you need to take something out of it and be able to talk about why. Like I think those clinical experiences for me gave me the reason why I wanted to do an MD, but I think that, yeah, I think you just need those few. I would not stress out about it. That's definitely not even close to the primary thing that is going to come up in the interview.
I think it's just having that like baseline. You need something that on paper says, okay, well they must like have some motivation for doing the MD to get you to the interview, and then you can talk about it more. I was a scribe at an ER about like 30 minutes from here for about a year, so I had, I guess, a bit more lengthy of an experience. But again, I think it really just boils down to being able to talk about, like, what about that experience instilled in you that you are convinced that you want to do the MD with the PhD. And I think as long as you have some sort of at least moderate length, or at least like multiple cases where they can say, okay, well, they've probably been able to get that sort of, you know, feeling and being convinced of it. I think there's not a specific length.
I think just to kind of add on to that, I think it's very much basically a qualitative thing, not a quantitative thing.
Right.
So basically, if you could check it off and say you did some, not just to say you did something, like, you know, you gained something from it, you could probably gain as much from like 1 week as you could from months of doing it. Just if you did it very intensely, actually followed something, asked the right questions, etc. Going back to what Josh said about the year off, I just want to just comment on that. I think, I don't know, I can't say for sure I would have gone back and taken any years off. I don't know, I already feel like I'm gonna be old enough when I finish. No offense to Josh, but
Hey,
or Dave.
life starts at 30.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know if I can go back and say that, but I can tell you I definitely noticed it in all of my classmates that taken time off between college and med school, that they showed it very much so, because they had actually been in the working force and understood what like showing up on time means, and professionalism means, and ethics mean, and things like that we all have, but they really get it. And so I had a weird like high number of people that were 4 years out. I don't know why 4, but that's just weird. I had a lot of people that were that age, and so they definitely showed it. And they would kind of look at us, you know, 22-year-olds that just got out of college and say, like, really? You're going to show up late every day for the same small group and start at the same time every morning and do the same commute every day? What is your excuse? And, like, there is no excuse. And so I can see myself that I grew a lot, you know, mentally between then and now, 5 years out. And I think there would have been a lot to have been had just in terms of buckling down, you know, focusing on, like, the right things and prioritizing properly early on in med school. Those grades are kind of all you have to show for yourself. Versus grad school, you have, like, you know, a poster here, you present there, you have good grades, and that doesn't really matter anymore. Did you have a good paper? That's what really matters. Did you have a grant, etc. So that's just my 2 cents in Josh's comment.
So, Adam, I'm curious to know your thoughts on this as you approach reintroduction to med school.
Right.
Leaving second year of med school and going into graduate years, I knew, and part of this was because I knew where I was going, I knew I was not ready to go on to clinical years. I don't know how you felt about leaving second year. I mean, I guess I probably could have convinced myself that if I had to go on.
I just think, like, because grad school definitely has a make yourself feel versus med school where you're just kind of like, it's going to happen regardless. Like, the exams are going to show up and your classmates are all doing, you're with a bunch of people doing the exact same thing as you. So the way I put that's you know, not to belittle it too much, but I felt like med school was like being in school again. You know, you should pack your lunch, you get ready for school, you bring your bag, you know, all that stuff, and that kind of makes you feel pretty juvenile. And you know, I have friends, so I have a lot of much younger friends now that have already gone on 3rd, 4th year of med school, so they're past me, and I can see that, like, it definitely, that makes you grow in itself. Going through 3rd year definitely makes you kind of grow up and realize some things about yourself, I think. But at the same time, yeah, I think there's a big difference. I think the age is just changes things. My friends that like took like 10 years off, they definitely are in a different world because they actually have like real lives and care about things like family and stuff like that. Am I going to make it out this weekend? You know, with my friends. That's not quite the first thing.
And so going back a conversation, I think that the important thing about like the clinical experience is that your application has to tell a story. So for me, my story was that I wanted to do cool science, and I thought the better science was going to happen if I had a medical degree, and I could do like cooler things when I could combine the clinic and the bench job. So because of that, it was not imperative. Like, I needed to know what it was like to be a doctor, but I didn't need to. I don't think I needed to really have that scribing experience or something more intense. If you're more interested in seeing patients 80% of the time when after you got your degree, and doing research 20% or doing clinical trials or doing something like that, then it's much more important, obviously, to have more of a clinical experience and tell that story when you're applying.
Interject real quick on that. I don't know if Josh will agree with me on this, but if that is your plan, I actually would say MD PhD probably is not a great idea.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to do MD PhD, you might as well, you know, if you're going to do like almost entirely clinical work, then you're wasting your time with a PhD. You're going to be fed up after a year of it, let alone 4 or 5.
I mean, if you go in really loving it and get through fast, and clearly there's no one sitting at the table who did that, you will spend the last year looking out at the guys building shock trauma thinking, oh man, why didn't I go into manual labor?
No, you'll second guess like every other day. You'll second guess like, why did I do any of it? So,
But I think that like there are a number of schools I've seen epidemiology programs or like other types of programs that aren't wet lab programs.
sure, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's still like they're still devoting so much of their time to like they're in their office, not like seeing patients.
Not seeing patients. Yeah, yeah.
So I think people always throw out the typical ratio of time is 20%, 80% of clinical to research. That's like kind of like a typical MD PhD schedule. And that varies based on the specialty you choose. If you choose internal medicine, you'll probably stay on that level, maybe lower clinical. If it's surgical, you're going to be needed in the OR. There's no way around it, so you'll probably go up to like 30 or 40%, maybe higher. But I'm just saying, I think like people always say when you get to med school, if you're as an MD PhD student, you're the vast minority of your entire 160 person class. They say, oh, look at you, money bags. You made all this. You're not going to pay for tuition, stuff like that. And they think that people do it to save the money, and it's like not at all. That's the reason for doing it, honestly. Just forget about the PhD. Go through, get good money like right out of residency, like 4 years earlier than I will or than Josh will, and then you'll make it back. You'll be fine. So it's really like and some will argue, well, like low repayment programs, stuff they kind of suck. But anyway, the point is, I think I'm just saying that this is definitely something that basically you're pulling off of med students, people that are really interested in research. That's kind of like what makes a PhD student different from a med student.
And I think the flip side of that, something that I've heard from I think everybody here, is we are not MD PhD students, we're PhD MD students, which is a subtle but I think important qualitative difference. I think I speak for everyone from what I've heard.
I think that's a spectrum, but I think there's some truth to that, yeah.
Right, so sure. But a lot of us said, and maybe just Corey and I really are long lost cousins, but I went into this wanting to understand disease from the patient's perspective and understand how the sort of systems integrated to impact disease and relationships between bugs, immune system, and drugs, as well as, there are lots of other systems at work. And so for me, and right now I have submitted my first application to anything in about 8 years for a basic science lab, and am sort of looking at clinical pathology, maybe with an internship attached to it. This is all evolving.
Yeah.
But I went in thinking, I'm going to do pediatric infectious diseases. I'll do like a fast track program coming out where you sort of combine residency and fellowship. You cut a year out. You devote more time to research, and that has sort of gone to the wayside. So things evolve too.
Sorry to interrupt you.
And then I continue to
But maybe we should also talk about, like you mentioned the fast track program, maybe we should talk about the structure of the MD PhD programs, different types, and what the benefits of some are versus others, and then also you guys can talk about residency.
I think
Well, maybe.
Well, that's pretty far ahead for the students. I mean, I think maybe we could touch on it, but I also would be curious to hear the questions. There's a lot of people this year.
Yeah.
There's a lot more than usual. So I'd be curious to hear what questions there are. But if we can, maybe we could though this could like touch upon some of the future stuff, like next steps, such as like most MD PhD programs, you're going to basically do less time than an MD plus a PhD. So that's for starters. So typically it's like 2 years MD, your entire PhD, which is like based in school. The average can be 4 or 5 years for PhD, which I see your face. It sounds painful, but like keep in mind a lot of PhD students deal with like 5, 6 years. So
like national average is 5.5.
Yeah, and then 2 years med school after.
Neuroscience is like 6.5.
Well, in our school, like Epi, like a lot of them have like an extra year in there, but
Like so many classes.
yeah, just a lot of coursework. But anyway, so that's the idea. I'll get 1 second, just one more thing. So then the fast track in terms of post med school is essentially, so you're going to go do a residency after this, and you could go do a typical residency at some small community hospital, but it's not conducive to your career if you want to go and do a PhD and do research. You want to be somewhere like academic, where there's a lot of cool stuff going on, a lot of smart people that are looking into future whatever questions. And so a lot of times for those things, many people say it's actually kind of like doing another MD PhD. You'll basically do like some sort of combined residency plus fellowship with research time built in, training program where you'll do like 2 years clinical work, 2 years research, and 2 years clinical work again. Like that's a pretty typical one. A lot of the residencies change a lot more.
That's
than
the
PhD
fast track?
So it depends, like,
yeah, throughout, like, you know, like, I heard about that for like cardiology, for example, which is a 6-year program in itself. It's usually 3+3, 3 meaning internal medicine, 3 cardiology fellowship. I mean, it depends on the program you choose. I don't, you know, I'm not really interested in this. So I've never looked into it. Like emergency medicine, for instance, like 3 or 4 years in the program. That's it. If you want to do research in it, I don't know, maybe there are programs that are 4 or 5 total. I don't know, but the point is, I'm just saying that's kind of like just to give you guys an idea of what you're looking forward to in the future. But I'm sure you're a lot more interested in what's going to happen in the next 8 years.
Getting to the future.
Yeah, right.
Or maybe
That's
even the
fine.
next year.
Yeah, even next year.
Yeah.
Fine. So,
Exactly.
if you guys have any questions about like
Did
applications
you have
or
one?
expectations,
Yeah.
I think there's one back there.
This was like very related to what you were saying.
Yeah.
So how do they shave off years from the PhD?
Basically, you are now required to take all the core requirements that the regular PhD students would have taken. So, for example, like things that kind of repeat a lot of what you took here in undergrad: genetics, molecular biology.
or first years of med school.
Sorry. Oh, yeah, it's also a lot of times covered in med school as well. Not quite as like in depth as it is in grad school. So you might have a little bit of like self-reading to do, but like that's not.
Is that something that the MD PhD program like talks to the PhD programs about, and they sort of
Yes.
work out a system for you?
Oh, it's yeah. You don't have to like kind of like go fight for yourself every time.
No.
Every time there's a new student. But, like,
And if they're telling you you will have to fight for yourself and create,
that's
Get
scary.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
that's
want,
not
you want
what
a
you want.
streamlined MD PhD program that like is they understand what it takes to be an MD PhD student. That it's hard and you don't need to deal with redundancy. Sorry, you're gonna say something.
I'd like to add to that. There's a spectrum in terms of how integrated the two are. Some programs, like Georgetown, for example, it's completely, you do your MD, you do your PhD, and it's going to take, 8 to 10. The school that I'm going to, Vanderbilt, actually, they've integrated a whole lot in terms of, they have a whole new curriculum where you're doing your clinical clerkship, so you're out in the hospital your second year, and they made their 4th year research. And what that does is that since you're doing a PhD during your time there, you obviously don't have to do that research year. So their program is actually 6 to 7 years, which is different from everywhere else as of now.
That's you're saying 4th year med school's a research year.
Yeah.
That's like Duke has that for a 3rd year.
Yeah.
the
Gotcha.
other thing is you don't actually shave time off your PhD. So for us, we do lab rotations sometimes before first year, after first year of med school, and then oftentimes after second year. And so fall of when I would have been in 3rd year, I started in the lab. I started the sort of required graduate classes, which bypassed some of the introductory ones. But I was in my thesis lab on my thesis project, and I hit the ground running. And the other thing is, you're an MD PhD, you just work your ass off. I mean, I don't mean to be crude about it, but unfortunately it comes down to that because you see time ticking away, you see the funding draining, and ultimately you just do what you have to do to get it done and get out.
And you might see the wheels turning a little bit from thanks to your program. Like they'll be you choose a PI based on like all kinds. PI meaning like your mentor, your lab head. You choose the PI basically on a variety of factors. One thing you might be interested in is are they going to treat you like crap and keep you forever, and that's not a good thing. So you want to get that hint. And a lot of times your program should have an idea of who's like that, and they steer students away from that, especially MD PhD students, because we have stuff to do afterwards on the PhD. That's not it. And so I think that's like the kind of thing that you can kind of figure out ahead of time. Your program might be pushing the PI, pushing a little bit, but that's not something to depend on for shaving off a whole year. That's like maybe a month, 2 months.
You also might sacrifice your second first author paper either as to do it later or to be a second author or a co-first author with a junior grad student because you have a responsibility to the program to get out and move on. So rather than linger and get more papers and make it a really brilliant PhD, you're going to go sort of moderately brilliant and just go on to med school.
Yeah. Also, certain programs will have a lot of guidance in selecting your mentor, and a lot of people who are mentors, both PhDs and MD PhDs out there, they are looking for MD PhD students because they tend to be very organized and really want to get out because they have all of med school and all of grad school. So for that reason, schools like Michigan have a research rotation advisory committee, and so they have just a bunch of people on the panel who know all of the faculty within the school. You go talk to them basically at the conference table, and you say, I'm interested in this field. Have you had any students in the program who have worked with these people? Did they have good experiences? And they'll recommend other people to you that you probably wouldn't have found. And so in that way, you can ensure having a really good mentor that everyone has had good experiences with, and they know will get you rolling on your PhD and get you out in time.
What was the next question?
So one of the things that I'm concerned about is I started research my freshman year and I've been doing it for 2 years now. I'm an end of a sophomore, so a year and a half, I guess. But my question is, my research is pretty esoteric. It's like structures of folded RNAs. So did all of you have research that directly related to the medicine and the research that you wanted to do, or is it okay if I'm researching something that I don't want to research for the rest of my life?
Totally fine.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not
I think all you do is say
Yeah.
It's totally fine.
I'm gonna say that with reservations, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think what they really look for in the interviews is that you've developed a passion to do research. And if you can show that you have passion to do medically relevant research, whether it's through your previous research experiences or through your clinical experiences, I think that that's generally okay. I know a lot of people, most of you guys that are going in are very kind of set on a specific field, and I'm still not 100% sure. And schools are okay with that too. So I wouldn't be so hesitant, but we're going to say.
No, that's lab rotations. That's kind of like part of
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's okay to not be 100% sure. I don't know, the way I saw it was, I told them, I'm still kind of funneling down to where I want to be, but I know that I'm already here and I'm going to get there because you're passionate about it. I think that's important.
Yeah, so I agree, and I think that I found that I was pigeonholed pretty hard into infectious disease and microbiology at every school that I was in, and partially I think that's because there aren't a lot of microbiology people that are interested in microbiology that are applying. So generally, I was the only one in my interview group. And I think maybe partially that was because on my application I said that I was really interested in it. But I think as even in the past year, no, but
I get why you did it because you did it because that's what your work was in. You can't say I'm interested in
right
the opposite of this, and I didn't go into it. I see why you did that.
Right, but even in the past year, my research interests have shifted and evolved and become more, and they've become more evolved. And I think that, but even now, even at the second look weekend, when I'm going back, there's still some of these programs are surprised that I don't only want to meet with microbiology faculty. So I think that if you want to switch, you should make that clear. I don't think that would be a problem. And
Do I have to switch now though? That's
no.
Okay.
No, if you're not sticking, just say I'm interested in.
Uncertainty.
Yeah, express the uncertainty, and that's not a negative, but definitely do it.
Because that's what my experience is mostly. Most of my stuff that I've done here is mostly related, I guess, to neuro and vascular stuff, and it's very interesting. So in my application, I really love what I do, and I could totally potentially see myself going there. But I have a lot of family history with cancer, and while I haven't had experience with it, I'd like to explore it, and that's how I laid it on the table in my application in itself. So they knew from the start, my experience is in neuro, but I'm still interested in exploring other options. So I agree with Ori that if right now you're thinking that things might change, I think it's totally fine because I was in the same spot. Just be totally upfront. I think honesty is the best thing throughout the whole process.
On the other hand, sorry.
Apparently, honesty is not the best. No, a lot of issues with that.
On the other hand, if you know what you want to do and you are able to formulate unique questions about the field, if you're like, this is the lab I want to work in, or these are the 3 labs that I want to work in, then you should do that because that is really good. At some places that I interviewed with faculty that I had read all of their papers and were not all their papers, but they were in directly in the field that the research I'm in now. I think that really helped me because they were able to say, oh, this kid's doing awesome stuff. I want this kid to come here because he's gonna work in my lab, and so there's kind of 2 sides of the coin, I guess.
So to add to that, to kind of sum it up, is that it doesn't hurt you, but it definitely gives you a little boost if you have a specific thing that you know that you want to research. Because I believe a bunch of the schools that I got selected for. So my big thing is neuroimaging and vision science, and a lot of the schools that I got selected for had a very strong neuroimaging or vision science group. And so when I went to those schools, I really feel like I already had my foot in the door because I could already say, I want to work with this faculty member, this faculty member. So I think it helps.
I'd add just a couple of things. I think, my research interests have evolved as well. They've pretty much stayed within microbiology, immunology. The lab to which I applied for a postdoc, it looks at photodynamic therapy for infectious diseases. So this is pretty far afield. I did a bunch of fluorescent stuff during my PhD, but not using it to treat diseases. So there's a lot of migration, and I think if you're not seeing your research interests evolve, you need to think seriously about why. Because if you're an MD PhD, you're supposed to be curious, you're supposed to be looking for what's at the cutting edge of knowledge. And the other thing is when I interviewed in Maryland, I met Michael Donnenberg, whom you guys may have met. He's become the program director. And I sat down with him and in about 5 minutes knew where I was doing my PhD. So if you find that connection with someone, I came out of a sort of parasite immunology lab. I worked with Dave Moser here on campus. So this was, and then I worked in a mosquito immunology lab. So, this was quite a jump, but I wanted something that doubled every 20 minutes. So that, you didn't have to synchronize 3 different organisms. The other thing is for your work, you're not focusing on ribozyme X. You're in an RNA biochemistry lab. So you're doing all sorts of stuff, not just with nucleic acids and learning nucleic acid techniques, you're learning presumably fundamental biochemistry. So these are techniques you'll take anywhere. And I think it's important to remember that your interest can and should change as you go from undergrad to graduate work. And then what you do for your PhD can be totally irrelevant to what you can be markedly different from what you go on to for postdoc or for residency, although again, having continuity helps. Where it really matters is as a PI. If you're going to be a practicing physician scientist, you really want a tight dovetail between your research and your clinical work. It doesn't have to be that way, but it helps, and it helps it have meaning to you. The other thing is, even when you're doing that, it'll change. You'll open up new questions.
Programs expect evolution, whether it be during your undergrad, just during the MD PhD years, or both.
A lot of good PIs will say, like, you'll be doing something for them, and you say, oh, an offshoot, I read this paper, it's kind of similar to this, and I'm saying whatever within this field, and say, all right, go for it. Like, a lot of good PIs will be.
I guess from like the admission standpoint, when you're applying to these programs, if your research isn't exactly what you want to do, as far as getting in goes, make sure you know your research really well, because I think that's a huge weeder point for these MD PhD programs. If you go in there and you don't act like you did some project, but all you really know is how to do the technique and not exactly what the project was, that's going to be a big red flag to them. So make sure you know, I guess, the big picture of the research that you're doing.
And you know your whole MCAS, honestly. But
Yeah.
and you can't fake it. Like they know you before you say a word, right? Like they know just from. I mean, I guess there were people at the interviews that that weren't like this, but almost anyone that got an interview was like living and breathing their research and their science, and wanted to do this from the moment they woke up in the morning to the moment they fell asleep at night.
Until they got really frustrated and wanted to go do whatever.
What other questions you guys have?
Did you have one back there?
Yeah. For those of you who have just gone through the application process, I was wondering how you balanced the personal statement, why you want to do medicine or why you want to do MD PhD, with the extra question on AMCAS, why do you want to do MD PhD specifically? What did you talk about in each of them, and how did you make them unique?
Probably just go down.
Yeah.
So for me, for the personal statement, I tried to make it really clear cut. This is why I wanted to do medicine, and I put a brief kind of shout out to research tied in there of because research interests kind of got me interested in medicine to begin with. So I kind of transitioned to I started in research, found out I was interested in medicine as well, and then that brought me to these medical interests, right? The Why MD PhD essay, I talked a lot about how I'm interested in untreatable diseases. So I talked more about, I guess, the field I want to go into, the things I wanted to do with the MD PhD. So it kind of went past and future for mine, I guess.
I followed a similar trend in that my personal statement was a little bit more, how did I get interested in medicine? For me, since I didn't really know I was going to do that at first, it was kind of for me looking back, things that have happened in my life that have kind of led me to make this decision that, wow, I think medicine is really for me. The MD PhD, I was a little bit different in that, again, I don't know if you were here before, so I considered my weak spot in my application to be that I only had 1 solid year of individual research. I had team research for 2.5 years, but 1 year. So for me, in my MD PhD statement, I kind of told a narrative into how I came to this absolute certainty that MD PhD was for me. I talked about my clinical, I talked about my research, and then I talked about how I really just couldn't see myself doing either of the two alone, and specifically how my 1 solid year of research, while it may not be as much as other applicants, why that is just so ingrained in me that I have to have the research aspect. And I think that between the two essays, I don't know if you guys will agree with me on this, I think you have to know your strengths and weaknesses of your application, and Wendy and the whole pre-med staff are really good at being honest with you about that. And I think that when you go through your application, you kind of have to keep that in mind. I know for me, like I was saying in my essays, I wanted to make sure I could convince, on paper I have 1 year of research, but really convince in my essays because that's where I can talk more, talk about why I know that's really for me, so you can get the interview and then you can explain things even more.
So I think that it goes back to what I said earlier about the story. And so you can do it any way is the right way if that's what fits your story. So for me, I wrote my personal statement about why I wanted to be a doctor and why I wanted to help people. And then like the last line was like, oh, I can also help people by doing research. And then the why I'm the PhD was, I love research, but I needed to have a more clinical aspect to it. And then the other thing that I didn't know about this at this point was that you get to pick, so like you list all of your extracurriculars, and for like 3 of them or something, you get to write why it was meaningful. And so what I chose was that I wrote 3 why meaningful things for 3 experiences, and then wrote my personal statement about a 4th. So you kind of have to like strategize. So you get the most information to them, the right information to them, and it's
Yeah.
Yeah, I just really looked at the 3 essays as one big story. The first one, why clinical, a little bit of research, and then that bled into the second one where it was, I want to do clinical and research, and then the last one, which was, 10,000 characters of all the research that you've done.
Yeah.
and
So
that's the most important one.
Yeah.
And so I think as long as you just kind of give them one cohesive picture of who you are, I think that's the most important thing. With that said, I don't think that the personal statement is as important as at least how I thought it was in the beginning, because I talked to a lot of people across the board, people that were in the admissions committee and all these things, and they're like, yeah, we just used a personal statement to weed people out, make sure you're not saying anything completely outrageous, something completely out there. With that said, put a good effort, put a good essay in, but I don't think it's as critical as sometimes we make it out.
I think that that's especially true maybe on the MD PhD side where you have more opportunities to make other points, and maybe a little bit harder on the MD only side where they have 5,000 people and they're looking for ways to eliminate you. Then if you don't really tell a good story, it could just be the reason that you don't get on with things.
And I think actually the recommendations were the most important part of the AMCAS, the primaries. And I actually heard this from several people that I interviewed with, and then after I got in, they'll call you, and they're like, yeah, your recommendations were number 1 or 2 reason that we accepted you.
I had similar comments.
Yeah, and I think that, so Wendy's letter is very, very, very important.
Yeah.
And then having multiple recommenders besides Wendy that are saying similar things, that they like you, they want to work with you, they spend time with you as a person, and not just saying, oh, he's smart, he did well on this exam, he was in my lab for 3 years and showed up on time. But Ori is a guy that I would essentially want to have a beer with, right?
Yeah. Quick side note, when I was in interviews, the people that I was interviewing with on the PhD side, the potential mentors, I guess, none of them had read any of my personal statement or anything, but all of them had read the letter of recommendation from my PI.
Yeah.
And they all knew that one, so that's definitely an important one.
Yeah, I can say.
Yeah.
Did any of you guys get recommendations from a doctor or something?
Yeah.
You shadow?
Maybe. So again, if anyone is not in a lab, anyways, if you have opportunity to do translational or clinical research, it's a nice experience. And that was most of my clinical training. I worked with a collaborator of Dr. Moser's in Brazil for several months, who's an MD PhD, biochemist, infectious disease doc, and I think I would be insane not to have had her write a letter of rec. So if there is one you work with, cool. But if you think that you have enough letters of rec from people who know you better and who are going to say things that really tailor it to what you want your application to tell your story, go with that. I mean, one of my Spanish professors, or one of mine, I've worked with Amnesty, I think. My boss there may have written one.
I was just at Pritzker over the weekend for an advisor visit, which was really interesting experience.
Chicago?
Yeah, in Chicago.
Oh,
were you?
Chicago, yeah.
Oh, I was
For a
there.
conference.
Yeah, Thursday through Saturday for an advisor conference. And we had a presentation by the MD, PhD folks who were really clear with us about some of the things they were looking for. But one of the things that they said very specifically, which you all are echoing here, is that you really have to know your PI and they really have to know you. And knowing the postdoc is actually not going to be that helpful in your application because they come and go from the labs. And the opportunity to work more closely with somebody who has a more long-term relationship with the lab is really important in your letters. I didn't necessarily know that, so I thought it was interesting to learn that from them and why they felt like that was important. So I don't know what you all think about that.
Can I touch on the clinical one real quick? I think it matters the quality. You know, for me, and you know, if I gained a lot out of my clinical experience, and I specifically worked with a doctor that knew me, kind of just like with my PI relationship, very similar, and they could speak to how I progress as a person, and that, you know, I have confidence that, you know, she's going to be able to interact with patients well, but she also has a critical mind. She thinks about problems that you can solve in the lab, you know, things like that. Even if you've done a 6-month clinical experience, if you don't have that interaction, you're better off using that letter of recommendation for someone that knows you better. If you have the clinical, I think if you have a quality recommender from a clinical experience, I think you should use it, because I think it kind of gives the whole well-rounded clinical and research picture. But if you don't, I wouldn't shove one in there for the sake of having a clinical reference. I think it's more important that it's quality.
Yeah, and your research mentors have
Yeah,
to be well represented.
The PI one is absolutely crucial, because I think a lot of it is the directors and even the people that you end up interviewing with. They're reading that letter of recommendation, kind of thinking, could I mentor this applicant? Could I work with them and could I train them and kind of help them grow into someone that's going to be able to think critically and perform really relevant translational research? So I think you have to make sure that your PI, you have the relationship with your PI where they can confidently say and articulate in the form of a letter of recommendation that yes, like, this is that person, this is the person you want in your program.
Did all of you publish papers before you applied?
I did, but barely. So it came down to like around the day I was submitting, like I filled in the journal name. So that was.
Mine was in the submission process. By the time I got to interviews, it had been accepted, but it was in submission. And you can put that in, that you submitted something.
Yeah, you can say submitted. So, okay, so I was writing mine, and I submitted it September 4th, which was actually after I had all my secondaries in. And I had gotten into a lot of the schools before it was actually published. And, okay, so I think on the one hand, publication, you can get in without a publication. On the other hand, if you have a publication, you're like in a whole nother league, especially if it's a first author publication. And like at all these things, people said, oh, publications don't matter, but it does. Yeah,
It helps.
It helps.
Not
And
having
I would
one
just say
kill
we
you.
would,
That's
like you
what
said, we won't eliminate you if you don't have a copy. Many people get it without it, but it does put you into different.
I don't think I did.
I had 2 abstracts in it, but not full manuscripts.
My experience was most people on the interview trail did not. So
certainly not first author papers.
yeah, absolutely not first author papers. And I'd say it was a large minority that did.
And it's not important to be the 4th author who washed dishes for the paper.
Mm-hmm.
That could not be less important.
Yeah.
Though if you have it, know what you did very well. Know how well you washed those dishes.
Yeah.
Why that's important.
No, but
Seriously.
more than that, no. Even if you're our 4th author, then you better know it like you are the first
Oh,
author.
absolutely. Yeah, but I'm saying, but they're going to want to know, so what you gained from this. It's like, well, I scrubbed those dishes.
So actually, this is an important and scientifically relevant point. If you haven't read The Great Influenza, I think John Barry, fabulous book. And there's a line in there, a story about a professor at the Rockefeller Institute, which was doing a lot of this really incredible cutting-edge science in this country in the early 20th century, really along with the Hopkins, sort of brought medical scientific research to the U.S. Story about the professor who was working with, a tech or a postdoc, and the professor, the senior person, was washing all the glassware. And he was asked, why are you washing the glassware? He said, I do all the most important part of the experiments. And having pristine materials that you work with, you don't think about it in the lab. All that plastic garbage leaks incredible amounts of stuff into your reactions. So while you're working with nucleic acids, use glass if you can, and make sure it's damn clean. And you know, being the last co-author is not a bad thing. My first pub, I was the last co-author on a paper I translated. So, but I got to present it at a national meeting.
Yeah, and you knew it as if you were the first author. I think that.
Or
yeah,
could
that is
fake it.
absolutely.
Which,
I think that's what he said.
yeah. And by the way, that is the most important rule for life that I can impart to you. All you have to do is be able to fake it really well for about a month.
For 2
because at that point
days,
you've
solid.
moved on to the next rotation.
Yeah. I just want to make a comment, like, if you were the person who was washing glassware, you want to present it exactly like he just presented it, bringing in that side note of, like, the importance of washing glassware and the significance to research, like, that's how you want to do it in the interview.
But I think that it's true that people understand that research doesn't always go anywhere, and it doesn't mean that you weren't productive and that you didn't know what you were doing very well.
Right.
So it's not always going to lead to a publication, but it could be very, time well spent in learning.
This is a little bit unrelated, but something just stemming off of what Wendy said that I think really helped me in the trail. So I've been doing things for a short amount of time research-wise. One of the things that I got to experience in my year of research was that things don't go as you always want them. But I think there are some people that do research for 3-4 years and they have a couple of publications and things go great and they have a mentor that kind of helps them through the problems and things like that, and that's good for them. But I think if you've had experiences that have been troublesome and you're able to say, this is what happened, I've learned that things don't go as you planned. I've learned it's super frustrating, but I showed up the next day ready to tackle them and ready to get over it and ready to find a solution. I think that speaks volumes in itself. It was kind of a suicide, sorry.
Donna Bird once joked that I was getting my PhD for having a whole bunch of fabulous ideas that never worked out. If you're succeeding more than about 10% of the time in your PhD, you're either cheating or doing an easy PhD. That's not entirely true. But.
To bring up the easy PhD part, how do you make sure the program that you're going to is going to have a full PhD? I've heard rumors of places where they hand you something and hope that you get it done. So how do you make sure that you're part of that process?
Mentor.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really going to come down to that personal lab. But I guess the only real statistic I can think of that you can ask directors is how many manuscripts are people graduating with. Make sure they're not graduating anyone with no manuscripts or something.
Yeah, I know our program
be
requires
skeptical
one
of
first author paper, so you have as many other papers as you want, but you have to have that one first author paper.
Yeah.
So that's our program. I'd say just in terms of life lesson, I'd say PhD lesson, the mentor is like everything.
Yeah.
It's really the biggest decision you'll make, I think, going into grad school.
And get on the interview trail too. Students are pretty open and honest about their experiences, and I think, maybe not asking them directly in that way, but I think when you're on the interview trail, you can get a feel for how that program is. And throughout my process, I would say, great programs, and on paper, I applied there because I thought that I'd be well suited, but I found that I could see myself at other schools more than other ones, and I think that you'll get a feel for that. You can ask the right questions to students that you interact with while you're there. That will also help in addition to the mentor.
The typical one is, are you happy in this lab?
Yeah.
It's like not offensive, very basic, and it saves a lot of people a lot of time. Yeah. Very. In fact, I once heard it was like a week ago, someone was saying how it was like a visiting speaker. They're saying how if you ask, people, when you go visit a lab, you ask postdocs and students about whether they're happy, they actually might be too giving of their information. If anything, they're too honest about it. So they always ask that question. It's easy.
And senior grad students will universally be unhappy, so just
Yeah.
calibrate.
Yeah.
But as you're going through these interviews, the most important thing is listening. So I had these kind of flags that would go up. So someone would say, oh yeah, that person graduated in or she's in her 5th year, or she's finishing her 5th year. And the first thing I would want to do is find out why. And I don't think that's really an unreasonable question. And you're always looking for if they've had a kid, did they get married, something the people that are over 4.5 years, you want it to not be a systemic issue, and I think that that's pretty universal. And yeah, but really just listen to those little things that people are going to slip, and you want to know what's going on in the program.
There is a rumor out there that MD PhD is PhD like, and it's not true. It's, I think, promulgated by either MDs who are jealous that they're not real doctors, and don't repeat that to anyone. But there is a hierarchy in degrees, and the PhD is the highest degree awarded by the university, which I learned. I also learned that PhD students don't write theses; they write dissertations. It's also, I think, by graduate students or people on the PhD side who sort of are jealous that you get to bypass some of the stuff that they went through. But I think in general, the MD PhDs that I know push themselves harder, do more interesting science, and work harder. And I would be surprised and curious to find out if you know of places where it is sort of a PhD like.
It's though you say either they're MDs and they didn't go through the PhD, or they're PhDs and they seem to think that maybe it's.
That's just something you got to get used to ahead of time.
Yeah.
I find that MD PhDs, instead of fitting in both, they fit in either. And basically, the MDs like look at you kind of like you don't care about people because you work with research. You're not going to be treating as many in their eyes, and then the PhDs say all you do is memorize all day. It doesn't matter.
But it's also sad because you leave those groups that you bond with. You bond multiple times. I mean, I've gone through 3 med school classes now, and you know, you just sort of stop trying to make friends. It's a little bit. I mean, maybe I'm just more antisocial than all of you. But the point is,
so you know, don't be scared.
But the other thing is, you know, he's married, he's got his friend circle. Like at some point, you know, it's not that I'm not friendly with my classmates, and I've been very impressed by them. But at some point, there is 4 or 5 years of experience between us. And when you're a PhD, you are responsible for your own stuff. I mean, imagine that. And then you go to third-year med school, and you're sort of spoon-fed everything and largely superfluous and sometimes dead weight. And so it's this very awkward return.
So to go along with that, something I didn't consider when I was applying was look at how big the MD PhD classes are. Because some can be up to 25, some are 1 or 2. So that's a big factor that I didn't consider when I was choosing my list of schools.
Why does it matter to you, David?
What's that?
Why did it matter to you as you discovered it?
Well, for that same reason, is if you're going with a large class, if you know you have a group of people that are experiencing the same things that you're experiencing, whereas if you're only 1 or 2, the organization to push those people through, and the weight that the MD PhD has within the med school, that'll be less because there aren't as many people.
Would you say that correlated with the MSTP status? Like,
Definitely.
I was curious.
But even that.
You might not want a place that has 25 people every year, too. You know, you're looking at, 160, 180, 200 people. You might feel like you get lost. Yeah, if you have 3 people in every year, you might want to be there more than 24. So I think find whatever fits. But I think that's excellent advice, because the MD PhDs are more my peer group than anyone else.
Oh yeah, no, I know. I'm gonna be good. But and the other thing is that what I found was that there were interviews where I met the director of the program, and I either interviewed with him or he sat next to me at lunch, and we got to know each other, and he knew my name and whatever. And then there were ones where the director came in during breakfast and read off a PowerPoint slide, and like they were kind of a figurehead. And I think that it gives a feel for how the program's going to feel, and yeah, so that's something else. And you kind of just get a feeling for how much they care about you, and is the director going to follow you through the whole thing, or is the director going to be there to get money for the program?
Their job is to be honestly, their job is to be invested in your success.
Yeah. Right.
As director and as a program, they're supposed to be pushing you through to see you graduate and get into good benefits.
Can I say one more thing before I leave? And then I'm out. So this is going to be the craziest year, or if you're applying now, of your life so far. I mean, like, there were periods of time where I was gone multiple days every week for a month or 6 weeks, and it was crazy. But just like kind of roll with it. Like, don't get too wrapped up in it. If you have a bad interview, like, you have a bad interview.
Recover.
Yeah, like, it's not the end of the world. And just like remember that this isn't a reflection on you as a person. It's a reflection on you as an MD PhD applicant. And everyone else is going to be doing just as cool things as you are. And you just gotta like remember why you're there and what you want to get out of it. So yeah, just have fun.
And if there's a bad vibe, you'll go somewhere else.
And it's not you. It's not you. It's them. Like if you don't fit in, like it's the program just doesn't fit you. It's not that you don't fit the program.
What was the primary question at your
Wait, for all of
Sorry?
us.
What was the primary question
For all
at
of
your
us.
interview?
Exactly.
I think probably answer better.
For me, it almost like it depends on the interview. So you have like your MD set interviews, you have your like PhD set interviews. Sometimes you have interviews with like the MD PhD administration. It kind of varies pretty highly. PhD side interviews was almost always sit down. Oh, hi, nice to meet you. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about your research. Like back to back, almost every single person on the entire like interview trail. On the MD side, they really highly vary, and that's just like you want to look up the school online, like see if there's some sort of interview feedback anywhere. Because like some schools do like multiple mini interviews, some schools will do all this like ethical scenario stuff. Sometimes random people will just do ethical scenario stuff, even though like the school's like, don't worry. Like when I actually interviewed at Michigan, they were like, don't worry, we won't give you any ethical scenarios. It won't be like anything crazy like that. And my first interview, the first question was an ethical scenario, but it's just because they're getting a bunch of random doctors and they're trying to come up with the interview questions for you. So the MD side's very variable. PhD side is very research focused, and then if you're like bonding with a PhD person, you start talking about hobbies, and it gets very casual.
Yeah. Only thing I'd add is they treat you very well.
Yeah.
As a PhD applicant, it is a completely. So I went to one MD interview, and my others were all MD PhD. It is two different worlds completely. Yeah. Besides that, the one question I got at every single interview is, why MD PhD? And it's usually just an icebreaker. They don't even care that much about it. They care, but it's so standard because you've already formulated your answer a million times that it's pretty standard.
The straight MDs who interview you will sort of not know what to ask you. So it's a really weird moment on the trauma ICUs when I bonded with one of the ID attendings because he was the only ID fellow trained by my dissertation advisor. So it was we bonded over like Shigella and Nikolai, very strange. But anyways, the point is, he said, oh, I've interviewed a bunch of MD PhD candidates. And he said, I actually suspect I've already interviewed with him. And he said, I have no idea what to ask him. Because I don't know, I can't really do for research, but they're all sort of a little bit abstracted from clinical medicine. So if you can sort of just get used to talking about why do you want to do the MD? I expect you'll encounter that a fair amount.
I think that's the main focus. On the MD PhD interviews and the PhD interviews, it's very research focused. I mean, there's like no getting around that. Sometimes you'll get why not just do a PhD? And then you go through what your essay said about why you're doing a PhD. So I mean, you already have the answer to that.
Translational medicine.
Yeah.
Translational research.
Yeah. On the MD side, I 100% agree that it's really variable. I think it's just a matter of knowing yourself. You'll have interviewers that ask you stuff that's on your application, ask you to elaborate on experiences. Some will give you ethical situations, and some will just ask, I would say, I don't want to say it was my hardest interview, but the one that made me think the most was actually at VCU when they asked, what was, your biggest obstacle that you had in undergrad and had you face it? Not pertaining to medicine, not pertaining to research. Just kind of getting to know you. I think the MD interview questions are more focused around that, but they're highly variable, so there's no real preparatory advice I could give except to just know yourself and just answer honestly.
Of course, you had the opportunity to reflect on that in your self-reflection because we have that question in there, and it is one of two questions on the Pritzker secondary.
Yep. And mock interview question.
And a mock interview question from yours truly. It's all about resilience and bouncing back.
Yeah, that's a really common secondary question, by the way. Tell me about your most difficult challenge and how you overcame it. Is a really common school-specific secondary question. I think half of my schools at least had that. And then the diversity one. Our school has a lot of diverse people, and we really value it. What do you bring to the diversity of our school?
Well, I'm pretty sure you all wrote that answer when you got to Maryland undergrad.
Yeah.
Is that one of the short answers?
Yep, that was one of the questions for us.
I did have a student one time say, "This is a personal question, and it's none of your business." That's what they wrote. I was like, all right.
They're non-med school. What other questions are there?
Did any of you guys, I'm hoping you all do, have any sort of hobby or extracurricular that's completely unrelated to medicine or research, and were you able to highlight that in your interviews, to show that you were a person?
Yeah, I think they really care about your personality. For me, I've been looking with the same three guys all years of college. I play guitar, I make synthetic music, I go out with my friends, and all those things do come up. I bonded in one of my PhD interviews over a real love of trumpet jazz music with the guy because I walked in and I used to play trumpet in high school, and I walked in and he's playing Louis Armstrong, and we spent the entire interview talking about that. And I think he probably wrote one of the strongest letters to let me into the school because he just really liked me as a person and thought it'd be fun to have you around the department. Like,
On that note, don't say that you play. Don't say you do something, but only kind of do it. Because
don't make it up.
If by some random fluke you have someone that's like, oh, like yeah, like I play this instrument, blah blah, it's like, like it'll show.
Yeah.
So just
don't pretend you speak French and then the person starts interviewing you in French or something. Like, do not do that.
I'm sure that happens.
Yeah.
I played club lacrosse all 4 years. That's my biggest like extracurricular thing that I've done. But it doesn't have to be something even that longitudinal. I mean, kind of like what Sam was saying. I mean, something just as simple as being able to have your interviewers believe that, like, oh yeah, like I could see him like going out and hanging out with his friends like on a daily basis and not just being in the lab 24/7. I think you don't need something as specific as like a sport or being in the orchestra or anything like that. I think you just really have to get the point across that like, you are a person, and I think that'll show through regardless of how long your extracurriculars have been.
Yeah, when you're also your personal statement, not being crazy, also helps.
Yeah.
It's all character stuff. It's all show.
What do you define crazy?
You'll know when you see it. It's like pornography.
I'll avoid like hot issues. That's like that's something.
I'll be very passionate about like very
He's voting justice.
Politics,
Supreme Court
politics,
justice.
religion, something. I would honestly not talk
I'm
about.
not just inappropriate.
It's a gambit. No, you don't have to disagree with you. It's a very polarizing issue. So
It's also weird when people remember when you.
I think you mentioned you're married.
Yeah.
How do you balance that?
no kids yet, but anyway, go on.
I was going to ask the same thing.
How do I balance? I don't know. I think it's. I didn't think there's any difficulty with it at all. Thank you. I think like long distance is like really hard. He unfortunately since passed away, but the guy that used to run the anatomy program in Maryland, he passed away 2 years ago. And beginning our end of orientation, he's like the last person to speak before he now starts your entire anatomy course with him. And he would always say to everybody, if you have a significant other, break up with them. He's like, give me their phone number, I'll call them for you, I don't care, just end it. And like, it was really dramatic, whatever. And sure, some people like, that relationship doesn't last because there's a lot of stress and the other person doesn't get, like, why can't you hang out with me still? It's like, well, I'm still studying, I'm still working. But overall, I don't know. I think you get a feel for that pretty quickly. I'd say the only thing that's kind of difficult about it is that your schedule is like really weird. You're kind of like, I know at Maryland, our schedule basically is you study all day and then you are available one weekend, you're half available the next weekend, you're not available at all the next weekend, you take an exam, you do it all over again, every 3 or 4 weeks.
But the flip side is that basically means you're working an 8 to 4 and 8 to 5 job when you're in your first couple of years of med school. You just have to be studying. And so, presumably, you just need to learn how to, I mean, I don't know how to do this, but you just cut off at the end of the day. And then, you hang out. I didn't develop my maniacal obsession with the lab until I was in grad school.
Be
careful.
Managing your time well. Like, kind of the same thing, you could study from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. if you're kind of studying, or you can study from 8 to 4 if you're really focused, and then spend, the extra 4 hours when you're something about it, or doing anything else.
For me, also, like I said, like long distance is tough, stuff like that stuff. So if people pull it off, I would say there's like I don't know what the statistics are, but like for me, it was really helpful that my wife, I met her here, we dated here, and then like we both moved to Baltimore, and we both like lived a block away from each other, and then we moved in together. So like that was kind of made it easy.
Yeah. In terms of interviews, what would you guys recommend, like the way of like going about it? So when you're entering like first interview, like what kind of like what the interviewers like to see in a person that like sort of like character wise or how they carry themselves? Like I know you're gonna say like general things like go there confident or like what you're getting yourself into. Like what would you guys suggest?
I'd just say be professional, be mature. Other than that, it's really going to vary on the person. Just like if any of us were interviewing, we'd probably all get slightly different things from you because we're just all different people, and it's the same with them.
I feel like I've said this a million times, but I feel like passion is huge. On the MD and the PhD side, I mean, it's the whole reason why you're doing both is that you're passionate about both. So I feel like in both interviews, it's important to get that across in a professional way and in a mature way and all that sort of stuff too. But I think that is one of the biggest things that will sell you.
I'd stick with good focus. You'll get a variety of experiences. I had one interviewer where I went into the room, he was completely silent for the first, 30 seconds. And I was like, okay, so, but at that point, I just started talking about my research because I figured that it was a test or something. And so, but also know when to stop talking as well.
Don't ramble.
Huge.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, you do the basics, and none of these things are issues. Like, you know yourself well, what you said before, be passionate for what you said before. Like, those things are just indispensable. That is what makes a good interviewer, just any interview.
I would add two things. Start by taking a deep breath. Maybe go to the bathroom beforehand. And two, just be yourself. If you're not, it'll show and it'll seem weird. And if you are, you'll find a place. I don't know if this is still true, but my recollection from when I was applying, most there were about as many MD PhDs applying as there were spots, or at least relative to the MD onlys, where I don't know what the selection is these days. This is a very self-selected group. So the point is to find a place where you fit, that has a home for you, and where you like the vibe and where they like you. And so trust yourself to find that.
Is that really true there, though, that there are as many applicants as there are spots?
I don't
Because
know.
at like
I don't- are
Harvard
you talking about
and
nationally?
they take like 10 people out of 600.
Are you
Yeah,
talking about
well,
national?
National
Yeah,
speaking would
nationally.
assume that it's
Yeah, I don't
Oh, okay.
actually know. I've never heard that. I'd have to look it up. I know at Maryland, the MD PhD success rate is the highest of any population that we have applying. So 77-80% of our MD PhDs get in. And the ones, and it's a self-selected population.
Yeah.
And they tend to be pretty well prepared. And I could, generally speaking, the ones who don't get in, I mean, there's a pretty clear reason why it didn't happen. So, I mean, not to say that everybody should just think, oh, this is going to be a piece of cake, because we're not saying that. I mean, we're saying, academically, the metrics matter, and we're saying that your longitudinal research matters, and if you are a fit with a program, then it works.
I think naturally it might that what we were just saying might be true, but like you were just saying, I mean, school to school it absolutely varies. But also what everyone was saying, it's very like self-selected. I saw amongst all my interviews, there was not after my first interview, there was not another interview where I didn't see someone that I'd already met in the interview trail. So it's very common. But I think a lot of it is also where you select to send your application. You have to understand your strengths and weaknesses. I had a 32. I wasn't applying to schools that wanted a 36, 38. I had a couple of reaches because it is an average sort of thing. But if I applied to all schools that had 38, it's like, there's no way. But amongst, being a competitive applicant for the types of schools that I was applying to and other people doing the same, you see a lot of the same people. You see a lot of the same people getting accepted to a lot of the same kind of schools and things like that. So
That's a really good point. And schools will fight for you. Particularly if you look at a place like Maryland. We don't have the reputation that, say, a Michigan or Yale has had, but we're clearly on the upswing and, have a lot to offer. And so it's why we have been fighting for at least some of the very talented applicants at this table. I don't know if everyone applied, but we're competing with top schools for people. So we're trying to woo the students too.
if they're not trying to convince you, something's wrong.
Yeah, and once you get the interview, it's not that you're in, but once you get an interview, there is a very high probability that you will get accepted. Particularly if it's early in the application cycle.
Timing matters a
Probably
lot with
adjusts.
MD PhD.
Probably just well, let's get into it. That's a big thing.
It does.
It almost becomes like a buyer's market at that point.
Yeah.
Like you're probably
Like that,
general
so-
jobs by applying early also.
And timing matters across the board, but particularly with
Oh,
MD
absolutely.
PhD
No, it's
because
like-
they don't interview a lot. So Maryland has like 3 interview dates, and is that 3, 4?
I think we just
I think
Now you
we've
added
done
one,
that,
so you're
yeah.
not. But still, considering MD interviews every single week, you really want to be in early so that you have that opportunity to get a good look and get a slot at an interview.
I tend to soapbox about this a little bit about timing because I myself didn't do it as early as possible, but I truly believe that is one of the biggest factors of success. It's so hard to believe that even regardless of the applicant, it just makes such a big difference because it's all like a trickle down method. Basically, you put in your primaries first, and then that means you're going to use the back first to get your secondaries and be able to get your secondaries in first. And then once those are in first, you'll be able to hear back by interviews first, and then you can hear back from the schools first to figure out what which school you're going to go to. And if you get thrown to an MD only interview, so they say we're not going to interview for MD PhD, but you might still be interested in that school for MD only. That will be earlier too. So every step, I just mentioned 4 or 5 steps. Every step that you are slightly late is literally logarithmically later down the road. So I know, for example, for me, I had some MD only interviews in mid to late March, just because I applied my primary a little bit later, that meant my secondary was a little bit later, that and so on. So just do it as early as possible.
It's a lot of work. Like I mean,
It takes
there's
days.
no
That's
sugarcoating
so
off that
much busy,
application.
but just do it. Just
It's
do it.
instead of drawing out your when I got a secondary, I was on summer break and I was at the beach with my parents. Got it. Sorry, like I'm gonna like finish like dinner at the table. Like I'm gonna start working on my secondary. For me, it was important to make those sacrifices because I really believe that me applying, sending that secondary 3 days later. I mean, I submitted my primary. I think it was like the first day. Like it's so important, and I think that it made a huge difference. So it's worth making those little sacrifices at the beginning. It really is.
And so general application tips for that is that all the essays, all the things that we need to have for them are already on the student doctor network. So a lot of people visit those for a variety of reasons. That's a good reason to go visit it. You can see all the secondaries.
It's the good reason.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the only time I've been.
Yeah.
Actually, that's the only occasion that I was on that form for. Was looking after I submitted my primary. I started looking at all the schools I submitted the primary to, saying if I get a secondary, what are the common secondary questions, and I started drafting stuff.
And you can pre-write all of your secondaries that way the moment that you get, because that is very important, is to get them in right after you get them in. And the other thing is that schools have different quirks to them. For example, UPenn is one that I found out later, is that they're very key on the letter of intent after the interview. And so that's one thing that is very important for them. But other schools have other quirks. So that's also something that you should research, look into what the school wants.
And they also want you to spell principal investigator correctly, it turns out.
Ah,
Attention to detail in this application, though, really does matter because you're going on to do research, which involves a lot of attention to detail.
And probably
And
just as importantly, you're going on to work with patients. And
Right.
if you miss a decimal place,
Yeah.
you kill the patient.
Right.
I've had basically like half of everyone I know like read through all of my essays and make sure there were no typos. Just like even if just a quick scan, make sure there's nothing glaring at you. The people are just gonna say this guy can't spell but and then throw it in the trash can because the U and the B were switched or something. You know, like
Take the time
Yeah.
to make those. Submit those with no regrets, but submit them as soon as you can.
Yes.
And I would say,
there we go.
so part of that, this is kind of like a basic writing thing, but part of that is actually starting really early so that way you can step away from it and come back with a fresh set of eyes. Just sitting there doing it, like no matter how many hours spent in a row, in fact, that's in a row, is going to make it harder to catch those things. So you want to have a limitation time and then walk away.
Well, we don't want to keep these guys all night. Do we have any last question for the?
I have a sort of
Good
silly
of
question. It sort of has to do with the attention to detail thing. As far as wearing professional attire for the interview, does everyone sort of wear the classic black suit, black shoes, white shirt? Do people vary with ties and shirt colors and etc.?
My interview was navy suit, but anyway.
Mine was gray, and I think I had colored ties.
No, but actually, the thing at the time was navy suit, for all the.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
I never
So-
know what the thing is.
as far as guys go, I saw a black suit. I heard of it. Everyone was going to be in a black suit and a navy suit, and then I didn't believe it. But I wore a gray suit anyway because I was like, maybe it'll make me stand out or something. I had a gray suit, and I got there, and literally everyone was in a black suit or a navy suit. And weirdly enough, it varied based on the school. Everyone was either in a navy suit or a black suit. But
That's funny.
yeah, it was kind of weird. But,
I'll say
yeah.
the majority were definitely in your traditional black suit, especially for girls. I guess girl here. If you are not comfortable in walking in heels, please don't wear heels. Please don't wear them. For me, I strayed away from the black suit just because I'm most comfortable in my gray suit. And I had a suit dress, and that's what I'm comfortable in with my gray flats, and that's what I wore. I think a lot of it, the last thing you want to be worried about on your 2-day or your 1-day, depending on the program, the interview, is what you're wearing. You don't want to deal with it. I mean, guys included, girls with the heels more, but just in general, whatever you feel comfortable, whatever you feel confident, whatever you feel, as long as it's professional, my suit dress, was moderate length, it was a suit dress, as long as it fits those general requirements, wear what you're comfortable with. Because that's the most important thing, and I mean, yeah, they might be like, oh, she's wearing a gray suit, not a gray, not a black suit like everyone else, but I don't think that's going to make or break you. What's going to make or break you is how you respond to your interview questions. If you're distracted with your feet hurting or your pants being too tight or something, you don't want to.
It can break you if you really make a mistake.
Right.
You don't want
If you're not
to. You don't
following
want
the
the thing that they're
Yeah.
talking about afterwards to be what you wore to your interview.
As soon as the
A
suit
hot
is-
pink
You'd
suit,
like to
you
be
don't need
forgettable.
You're wearing something neutrally gray. Or
Yeah.
black
Yeah,
or
neutral. I would
whatever.
say don't wear a hot pink suit. Even if it's still a suit, maybe not the best idea.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
within reason.
That's what you're saying.
Actually, I have a quick question. For you guys that are in the programs now, do you know anybody who was not accepted to MD PhD but was accepted to the MD only at a program and then decided to move into MD PhD from there? Were they successfully able to do that? Could they find research at their
So
school?
I don't know anybody that applied MD PhD, only got MD, and then went back and they got in. I know people that did MD, started out were like, I love research. I don't know why I didn't do this program. And it's called second cycle application.
Well, okay.
That's after your first year. So we have in our program too.
Three. Teresa.
Teresa's also one? I
Yeah.
didn't know that.
And actually,
three. Okay.
I mean, Teresa is better known as Chuck Norris to some of us in the program, and she's kind of a badass. So some of our better students wind up cycling in that way, and some.
I have heard in some schools that there are a select few that do the second
Cycle.
but they initially applied as MD PhD. They didn't just go in straight as MD.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't know any that did that.
Because I can imagine it's hard to
It's
continue
rare.
your research as when you're in med school and then apply to MD PhD and say you've been continuing this.
Well, a lot of people, a lot of MD students, MD only students, that first summer is sort of like a spectrum. You have no idea like what you're gonna do. It's basically it's your last real summer, you know, of your life. And the question is, okay, do I go and like have fun with it? Do I do something I've never done before with it? That's like professional but not science. Do I do science? Do I do research? Am I just gonna like shadow? There's all these options. And so a lot of people like will go and do research just because they think to themselves, well, some of them know what specialty they want to do, or they're going to go research in that specialty, already start boosting their resume for residency applications 3 years later. And some are just going to do research in something so they can have some research experience. Some already know they love it, and that's their like final like step before saying, all right, you know what, I'm going to go get a PhD too. And I know a guy, one of the guys in our program, he did a summer, loved it, just couldn't get away from it. So he decided, I'm going to take a year off, like do a leave of absence for a year. Did a whole year of research, then got into the program. Basically, that year kind of like counts as like one of his graduate school like research years. So that was like, he was really thrilled about that.
Thank you guys so much. This was fantastic.